My world shattered when my wife toasted to our divorce at her company gala. I sat there, glass frozen halfway to my lips, as the tinkling laughter of her colleagues turned into a muffled roar in my ears. She stood there, radiant under the crystal chandeliers, the woman I had loved and built a life with, casually telling a room full of strangers that our marriage had been a stepping stone she was ready to outgrow. The worst part? I had bought her the dress she was wearing. I had introduced her to the man who was now holding her elbow, laughing a little too loudly at her cruel joke. In that moment, 7 years of my life dissolved into a humiliating spectacle, and I realized I had been financing my own annihilation. My name is Daniel, and my wife's name is Clara. We met 8 years ago in a used bookstore I used to frequent, a dusty, magical place tucked between a laundromat and a closed-down hardware store. She was working there part-time, a philosophy major who had left university after her second year, adrift and unsure of her path. I was a mid-level project manager, steady, perhaps a bit predictable. The store was my sanctuary. I go every Saturday, losing myself in the stacks. Clara was always there, usually perched on a small ladder, reorganizing a high shelf or reading behind the counter. She had this intense, thoughtful presence, a quiet seriousness that contrasted with her quick, warm smile. Our first conversation wasn't about books. It was about the rain. I'd come in without an umbrella, and she'd offer me a worn copy of The Count of Monte Cristo to read under the awning until the downpour passed. We talked for an hour. She spoke about ideas of the passion I'd never encountered, about Camus and the absurd, about wanting to do something meaningful but feeling utterly lost. I was captivated. I started visiting more often, sometimes buying books I didn't need just to have an excuse to talk to her. I learned about her small-town upbringing, her parents who struggled, her intellectual ambitions that felt stifled by circumstance. She learned about my orderly life, my love for architecture and history, my quiet satisfaction in building stable things. What began as a weekly chat blossomed into something deeper. She made me feel alive, as if I'd been viewing the world in black and white, and she handed me the first brush of color. When I asked her out, 6 months after that first rainy conversation, she said yes with shyness that belied her fierce intelligence. My family hated her from the start. To them, she was a project, a pretty, penniless intellectual with no concrete prospects. My mother called her a sophisticated gold digger. My father warned me she drained my ambition. They saw her lack of a degree as laziness, her philosophical musings as pretension. They couldn't understand that her mind was the most attractive thing about her. Their disapproval only solidified my resolve. I loved her. I believed in her potential. I saw a brilliant woman trapped by bad luck and limited means, and I wanted to be the one to help her soar. So, against their vehement protests, I married her 2 years later in a small ceremony. Her parents cried with gratitude. Mine sat in stony silence. For years, I considered it the best decision I'd ever made. I truly enjoyed supporting her. I helped her navigate returning to university part-time to finish her degree. I paid her tuition, bought her textbooks, celebrated her A's as if they were my own. When she graduated with honors, the pride I felt was immense. I used my network, calling in a significant favor with an old university friend, Martin, who was a senior director at a prestigious cultural foundation. He agreed to interview her. Clara aced it. Her intellect and passion were genuine and landed the job. It was perfect for her. Curating literary events, managing grants for writers, working in a world of ideas. I was thrilled. My wife had found her calling, and I had helped pave the way. But the change was subtle, a slow shifting of tectonic plates. The first sign was her new lexicon. Our conversations, once about ideas and dreams, became peppered with names I didn't know, references to exclusive gallery openings I was invited to, anecdotes about witty, powerful people she worked with. She started dressing differently. The cozy sweaters and worn jeans were replaced by sharp, minimalist designer pieces. She said it was necessary for the role to be taken seriously. I understood, and I supported it. I paid for the new wardrobe, reasoning it was an investment in her career. Then came the events. The foundation was always hosting something: donor dinners, author readings, cocktail fundraisers. Spouses were explicitly invited. Yet, Clara never once asked me to join her. At first, she'd say, "Oh, it's going to be dreadfully boring, just a bunch of suits talking about tax deductions for art." Later, the excuses became vaguer. "It's really a work thing, darling. You'd be miserable." I began to feel like an inconvenient piece of her past, something that didn't fit the sleek, new image she was cultivating. When I gently insisted once, she sighed and said, "Fine, if you must," with such palpable reluctance that I dropped it, the sting of her embarrassment sharp in my chest. Her physical transformation was the most jarring. Clara had always been naturally, austerely beautiful, sharp cheekbones, intelligent eyes, a mobile, expressive mouth. Then came the procedures. First, it was Botox to smooth her forehead, then lip fillers, then a rhinoplasty she described as refining. She spent her entire salary, a salary from a job I helped her get, on these alterations. When I tentatively asked why, she'd flare up, "It's my money, Daniel. My body. This industry values aesthetics. I'm investing in my career capital." To me, it felt like she was erasing the woman I fell in love with layer by layer. The familiar landscape of her face was becoming a polished, impersonal mask. Financially, nothing changed. I paid the mortgage, the utilities, the groceries, our vacations. Her money vanished into cosmetic clinics, luxury handbags, and expensive lunches with colleagues. She had no savings, no thought for a future we were supposed to be building together. When I broached the subject of financial planning, she'd wave a dismissive hand. "You're the financial wizard, darling. My contribution is the social capital." It felt unequal, transactional. I was the foundation. She was a soaring, decorative spire, with no regard for the structure holding her up. The promotion party was the beginning of the end. She'd been made head of literary programs, a huge leap. She decided to host a celebration at our home. In the days leading up to it, she repeatedly said, "You know, you don't have to play host if you don't want to. It's mostly my work people. You might find it insufferable." Each time she said it, it felt like a tiny paper cut. "Of course I'll be there," I'd reply, forcing a smile. "I'm proud of you." The night arrived. Our home was filled with her chic, chattering colleagues. I recognized no one. Clara floated from group to group, a glittering hostess, never once steering anyone my way, never saying, "This is my husband, Daniel." I was a ghost in my own living room. I introduced myself to a few curious guests. Their reactions were a mix of surprise and vague pity. "Oh, Clara's husband. Right? She's mentioned you," one said, before quickly turning away. Then came the speeches. Martin, my old friend, said a few kind words. Then Clara took the floor, champagne flute in hand. She spoke eloquently about her journey, painting a picture of solitary, self-made climb from obscurity. She talked about late night studying, about overcoming imposter syndrome, about her sheer grit and talent being recognized. There was no mention of the husband who paid the bills while she studied, of the friend who opened the door, of the emotional support through every crisis. I was airbrushed out of her origin story. Then, with a theatrical wink, she said, "And they say marrying well is a career strategy." I suppose I did, in a way. It gave me the peace of mind to focus entirely on myself. Polite, confused laughter rippled through the room. My face burned. She took a sip, her eyes glinting with strange, hard light. But now that I've officially surpassed my husband's salary, sorry, darling, I guess the training wheels are off. Maybe I should start looking for a younger model. The laughter this time was strained, horrified. My heart hammered against my ribs. She wasn't just omitting me. She was publicly downgrading me, turning our marriage into a crass, outdated financial transaction she had now outgrown. I moved through the crowd, my vision tunneling. I touched her arm. "Clara, maybe that's enough of the speech," I murmured, trying to sound light. She jerked her arm away, her voice cutting through the murmur. "Don't be such a bore, Daniel. Can't you take a joke?" The silence was absolute. I saw Martin looking at his shoes, his face pale with embarrassment for me. I didn't say another word. I just walked out, got in my car, and drove aimlessly for hours. When I returned, the house was empty and dark. She was already asleep in the guest room. The next morning's confrontation was a masterpiece of deflection. "You're too sensitive," she said, scrolling through her phone. It was a joke. Everyone knew it was a joke. "God, you're so fragile." When I pressed her on the younger model comment, her mask slipped for a second. "Well, one has to think practically, Daniel. People grow apart. It's naive not to have an exit strategy." It felt like a door slamming shut in a distant room of our marriage. The coldness in her voice was new, and it was absolute. For 6 months, we lived in a polite, frozen wasteland. I slept in our bedroom. She stayed in the guest room. We coordinated schedules to avoid shared meals. The love I felt was buried under layers of hurt and a dawning, terrifying suspicion. Then the dam broke. She came home early one Tuesday, her face blotchy from crying. She'd been demoted. The foundation's board, she claimed, had suddenly decided her position was redundant, and she was being moved to a lesser role. She was hysterical, demanding I hire an aggressive lawyer to sue for wrongful demotion. My mind, finally clear the fog of devotion, went cold and sharp. This didn't add up. "Let me talk to Martin," I said calmly. "He's on the board. He'll know what happened. We need facts before we start a legal war." Her tears vanished, replaced by instant, venomous rage. "You're siding with them? Of course you are. You've always been jealous of me. You can't stand that I became something on my own. You probably poisoned Martin against me." The accusation was so unhinged, so grossly unfair, it finally snapped the last thread. Jealous? I had been her chief cheerleader, her financier, her connective tissue to the world she now inhabited. "I'm going for a walk," I said, my voice terrifyingly quiet. When I returned, she had locked our bedroom door. A note was taped to it. "Get me the lawyer or I'll file for divorce and take everything." That note was my permission slip. The next day, I met Martin for lunch. He looked grim. "Daniel, I wanted to tell you 100 times," he began, his voice heavy. "But Clara, she told everyone you had an arrangement, that yours was a marriage of convenience, that you were asexual and had mutually agreed to see other people. She said you were fully aware and supportive of her extracurriculars." The world tilted. I felt physically sick. He detailed not one, but multiple affairs with colleagues and donors. The most serious was with a married board member, a man named Robert. Clara had flaunted the affair so brazenly that Robert's wife, Evelyn, found out. When Evelyn confronted Clara at a foundation event, Clara had reportedly laughed and told her to stop being such a provincial little wife. The scandal was contained but vicious. The board, faced with toxic employee destabilizing the workplace and alienating major donors, had voted unanimously to demote her. Her bad attitude was a diplomatic way of saying she was a malicious, unprofessional homewrecker. She said, "What about me?" I managed to ask, my throat tight. Martin looked pained. "She told people you had performance issues, that the open marriage was your idea to compensate. She made you a pity figure, Daniel. We all thought you knew and had accepted it." I left the restaurant and drove to a quiet park. I sat for hours, watching the sunset, feeling every happy memory of the past 8 years curdle and turn to ash. The bookstore, the rain, the conversations. Had any of it been real, or was I just a useful fool from the very beginning? I needed irrefutable proof. Martin connected me with Evelyn, Robert's now ex-wife. Meeting her was a surreal experience in shared devastation. She was a calm, elegant woman hollowed out by betrayal. She confirmed everything, showing me text fragments and social media clues she'd pieced together. She took a sick pleasure in it, Evelyn said softly. It wasn't about love or even lust for her. It was about conquest, about proving she could take what belonged to someone else. You and I, we weren't people to her. We were benchmarks. Armed with this, I hired a divorce attorney before confronting Clara. My lawyer advised me to gather evidence quietly. I accessed our shared cloud account, finding receipts for hotel rooms on nights she claimed work conferences, and discovered hidden credit card statements for gifts clearly meant for a man. The portrait was complete, and it was monstrous. I confronted her on a Sunday morning. I laid out printouts of the evidence on the kitchen island. The financial records, the timeline of her affairs corroborated by Evelyn Martin's testimony. I didn't shout. I was past anger into a cold, clear expanse of grief. She went through the stages. First, denial. These are forgeries. Evelyn is a jealous liar. Then rage. You invaded my privacy. You're a pathetic, controlling man. Finally, when she saw my unwavering calm, she attempted performance of a lifetime, crumpling to the floor in heaving sobs, begging for forgiveness, saying it was a momentary lapse, that she felt insecure, that she loved me. I watched her performance dispassionately. "The divorce papers will be drawn up this week," I said. "You need to leave. Today." She moved out that afternoon, her contempt finally bare when the performance failed. "You'll regret this," she sneered as the taxi pulled up. "You're nothing without me. You'll die a boring, lonely man." The divorce proceedings were brutal but swift. My lawyer used the evidence of her adultery, her financial dissipation of marital assets. Her salary was considered a marital asset, which she'd spent entirely on herself, and her attempt to defame me to block any claim for alimony. The prenuptial agreement my family had insisted on, which Clara had signed with dramatic reluctance, calling it a loveless document, now protected my premarital assets and my inheritance. She was entitled to a small portion of the marital home equity, which I offered as a one-time settlement to sever all ties cleanly. She fought it, of course. She claimed emotional abuse, coercion, trying to paint me as the villain who had stifled her brilliance. But the facts, presented coldly and clearly by my lawyer, were undeniable. The judge saw through her. The settlement was finalized. The last time I saw her was across a conference room table at the final hearing. She was still beautiful, sharp and polished, but her eyes were hard as flint. There was no trace of the thoughtful woman from the bookstore. That woman, I now understood, had been a figment of my own hopeful imagination, a character she played until she no longer needed the stage. She signed the papers with a furious slash of the pen and left without a backward glance. In the months since, the silence of my house has been a healing balm. I sold the place. Too many ghosts. I bought a smaller, sun-filled apartment with a view of the city. I reconnected with old friends, with my family, who, to their credit, never once said, "I told you so." I started therapy to unravel why I was so willing to be used, to build my worth on being a provider for someone who saw provision as entitlement. I heard through the grapevine that Clara moved to a different city, still in the nonprofit world, but at a much smaller organization. The glittering career she coveted had been torched by her own toxicity. Martin told me, with grim satisfaction, that her reputation had followed her. The world of cultural foundations is smaller than it seems. My story is not one of triumphant revenge, but of slow, painful awakening. I loved the phantom, a constructive potential, and my own generous projections. I learned that you cannot build a shared future with someone who only sees you as a foundation for their solitary monument. The divorce was not a defeat. It was the demolition of a false structure. I am rebuilding, alone but on solid ground, brick by honest brick. The peace I feel now is deeper than any happiness I ever thought I had with her. It is the peace of truth, however harsh, and the quiet promise of a life that is truly, finally, my own.